I'm very interested in this bit here, because you're alluding to one of the common conversations you and I have had now for about 6 or 7 years. And I want to pause you there, really. And one of the challenges, if you want to be a recovery group and you want to be independent, is this concept that you and I have juggled with all the time, which is about the notion of the king's shilling. Where does your money come from, and what do they want from you? And I know that you and I have had so many conversations about, God, I don't want these people's money anymore, or, so I'm very interested in your ideas on some of that stuff about how that affects the way recovery groups do and don't behave.
Yeah. I think when I first got involved, I mean, I think that suspicion, I think it's the only way you can kind of call it, because there's a price to everything in life. But I think one of the things that I'd seen very, very early on within treatment services, there was a lot of tokenism. There was a lot of, you had a couple of guys who get wheeled out for this event and get wheeled out for that event. Do you know what I mean? And it was just like, so I kind of said at the start when we first looked at aggro, let's try and do this. Let's only seek funding if we need funding. If there's something to fund, you know what I mean? Let's actually try and establish terms of reference first, and what we're trying to actually do, and what we're trying to build, and what we're trying to develop. But I think at that point, because it's quite a political sort of thing to get recovery, and there was a lot of willingness at that point, ironically, to fund recovery. So I think kind of almost we got pushed into funding and a coordinator and all this sort of stuff, and it never really sat very well with me, but it was what it was. And kind of, but when we looked at specifically for this, I mean, again, that was probably why I first kind of, I'll be honest with you, Wulf, why I first approached yourself and Katie were probably two of the very early conversations I had once I decided to go it alone and to set up on my own at that point, as I was to have conversations with you. And that was why I deliberately sought funding outside of the substance use field, because I was fearful that we'd be deliberately undermined by previous employers, where particularly there was a lot of employment tribunal issues and stuff still going on, and I had zero trust and zero faith in the commissioning arena within North Wales, even though there's some good people involved, but particularly in terms of interagency stuff. I've sat in meetings where we talked about trying to, particularly through aggro, trying to almost create like a recovery group that would have dovetailed perfectly with criminal justice, where we basically would have been able to work with, even with sort of Schedule 1 sex offenders, high risk arsonists and stuff. We could have done all this stuff there. And I can remember having a conversation with the chief exec at the time, and he just went, "There's no money for this." And I said, "Well, what happens if we go for the money and we find the money?" He said, "If you get the money, your competition at that point, all bets are off." Do you know what I mean? And I just thought, we're talking about trying to build something that.
And I know you're talking about that, and I can see him I can see him here. Yeah,
yeah, smarmy fucker he is, still is. But yeah, then it was just so we didn't want to do that typical drugs and alcohol sort of thing. And plus, as well, I must say, there's probably a little bit of pride in there, was that because this was just a concept at this point, we didn't know if it'd work. And what I didn't want to do was fight for ages to get drug and alcohol money, and then to do it, and then if it hadn't worked after 12 months, for them all to be like, look at you sort of thing. So it was kind of, we thought, well, if we can get into this, because this flexible support funding through the job centre, DWP, was 2 years. So if we can get into this, we can trial this project and give it 2 years, which is, in my opinion, is what any group or any project or any pilot needs, is 2 years, because you've got to have 12 months of feeling through all the projects, finding out the bumps, and 12 months to finish it, and to get it sort of.
But this is a strong principle you're talking about here, really, because, I was asked it today by someone, and we're talking about, and the only way I can say this really is genuinely peer-led. Other stuff is what we might call peer involvement, but actually it's only independent recovery communities where it's peers from kind of almost trustees down through staff, down to members, down to the people who work through the door, and there's collective decision making. That's really the only genuine claim at one level to peer-led, something that AA have always been able to claim, but a lot of other stuff use that expression, but it's really involvement and not peer-led, is it? And that's what you were after at some level, not to be led by others. Yes.
Yeah, that was the thing I was talking about before, about the tokenism, and about like your APB meeting, they have like a service user as the chair. you know, and you think, really, you know, what's he chairing? He's chairing the meeting. They wouldn't allow him anywhere near, you know, he'd probably still not even allowed to use the same toilet as them or drink out the same mugs, you know what I mean? But he's chairing the meeting. So I just didn't want any of that sort of nonsense. So like I say, we just wanted 2 years, a fair crack of the whip, and to be able to do it outside that arena. And then we did it, and yeah, the recovery sort of element to it went fantastic. But the beauty of it was the housing stuff allows us to generate a surplus. So a very small surplus, but a surplus that we can then use to subsidise the sort of therapeutic programme. So we had 2 years, it sounds ridiculous because I had 2 years when I personally didn't receive a salary, but 2 years for us where we received no funding through Welsh Government at all, which we now look at as nirvana because we didn't have any of the bullshit monitoring forms or any of the crap that comes with it. We were just able to get on to do what worked with people, you know, and that, I think that was probably 2 of the most fundamental years for us because we were just able to concentrate and focus on what we were doing. Sadly, because of the provision that we get or the housing benefit stuff, we can't provide anything that looks remotely therapeutic through that sort of type of work. So again, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why we're such a big advocate for mutual aid and peer-led stuff is because, like I say, it's free, but we can't provide that as a service, even though if we wanted to, because we can't because of the way that the sort of housing stuff is funded as well. But again, it was also just recognition for us that like I went back to that thing at the beginning, that very pure concept of a recovery agenda being building a bridge between treatment services and recovery communities, mutual aid, fellowships and stuff like that. And that is all we've ever tried to do, is just basically provide a space and host. So that's why we're AACA and all those sort of groups, they're not our group, fellowships. We just provide them, but we know that by inviting them into our space, our guys get well.